Known for their inquisitive nature, Galapagos sea lions are a favourite amongst residents and visitors to the Galapagos Islands. Sadly, our research has shown that they suffer more reported injuries from lost and discarded fishing gear than any other species in the Galapagos archipelago. Sea lions have also been found ingesting plastic and entangled in plastic bags, a truly heartbreaking scene to witness. Galapagos Conservation Trust is taking action to protect wildlife both at sea and on land. From working with the local community on plastic bag alternatives and environmental education, to supporting the Galapagos National Park with coastal cleanups in hard-to-reach locations, we are partnering with scientists and organisations across the Pacific to tackle the root causes of coastal plastic pollution and bring together island communities fighting for a legally binding UN Global Plastics Treaty. To support our work, please visit us at galapagosconservation.org.uk or donate to our Galapagos Sea Lion Big Give Appeal. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome back to Story Planet Podcasts with me, your host, Jack Cole. So today I'm joined by Jess Howard from the Galapagos Conservation Trust. So first of all, Jess, thank you so much for your time and welcome. And you start by telling us a little bit about your background and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack. I started as a marine biology student at the University of Southampton. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to visit Galapagos Islands on a field trip, which is pretty crazy, pretty unique. And before then, I was kind of a multi-passionate marine enthusiast. So I was interested in all areas of marine science. I didn't have like one thing that was my set focus. And then I went to the Galapagos Islands and just completely fell in love. Came back to the UK, begged the lecturer that took me there to let me change my dissertation to study marine iguanas in Galapagos. So I was able to do that. And then I just kind of, met the right people, amazing people in Galapagos, researchers, and in the UK as well, that kind of supported my obsession with the islands and helped me keep finding excuses to go back. So I went out after I graduated and I volunteered with the Marine Invasive Species Project at the Charles Darwin Foundation. And then it was while I was there working with them that the amount of plastic that was coming into the islands, everyone was noticing this increase in it. And we noticed that attaching to the plastic were a lot of different species. And we were like, oh, I wonder what the potential is for plastic to be bringing in invasive species into the islands. So then we kind of started this spin-off project looking at collecting plastic from around the archipelago and looking at the little encrusting organisms that are attaching to it. So little stuff like barnacles and crabs and that kind of thing to look at the potential for transporting species around, which obviously would be a huge problem if it was bringing in invasive species. And then after that, so I kind of kept bouncing back between the UK and Galapagos, and then got involved in that world of plastics, made some contacts with the Galapagos Conservation Trust, who I now work for, and met the amazing people there. Over the next few years, I just kind of stayed in touch with this amazing group of people, and then found my way back during the COVID lockdown, actually, to work with GCT managing their plastic pollution program that they co-managed with the University of Exeter. So that's how I found my way back to GCT after, quite a long journey of lots of different varied things.
Fantastic. And could you give us a bit of an overview of the islands in terms of their history, some of the species, and some of the more interesting, fascinating facts therein?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the Galapagos Islands, they're a really small collection of volcanic islands that are just off the coast of Ecuador. So they're in the Pacific Ocean. I think there are about 13 big islands and then like lots of little smaller ones. And they're all made up of basalt, so like really crunchy, spiky black rocks. They are famous, the islands, for lots of different things. So it's where Charles Darwin kind of gave birth to his theory of evolution by natural selection. It's also the world's first UNESCO World Heritage Site. But I think people kind of most recognize it for the amazing biodiversity that's found there. So all of the really unique and endemic species that you get. So we're talking Galapagos giant tortoise, we're talking Darwin's finches, blue-footed boobies, all the weird and wonderful things that you can find in Galapagos is really what it's famous for. That really high degree of endemism. So 80% of the land birds and 97% of all of the reptiles found there are unique to the islands, they're only ever found there. The Galapagos Islands as well are really well protected. So 97% of the islands are Galapagos National Park. So as tourists, you can only visit 3% of the islands. And yeah, the islands themselves have a permanent human population of around 32,000 people. So that always surprises people that it's such a big number, right? You think of them being like so remote that people couldn't possibly live there. But no, they've got quite a big growing population of people, the local community. And then just over 200,000 tourists every year as well. So they attract a lot of people because they're such an incredible place.
And a lot of pollution, which we're about to get onto. So you went to Lisa a bit about you guys are specializing on sea lions specifically, and some of the issues that they're having. And of course, as you say, all these tourists are coming over, bringing all kinds of lots of income for the locals, but also lots of pollution. And can you tell us about the work that you guys are involved with at GCT and how that's playing out?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so in terms of like the local waste generation, we actually know that it's actually a very small amount of plastic pollution that's being generated locally. So across beaches and coastlines around the islands, we know that over 95% of what we find there is actually coming from outside the marine reserve. So this isn't a local source of plastic pollution. The vast majority of pollution is coming from, outside the marine reserve. So that's from a few different sources. So we know that it's coming from the mainland, so continental urban areas around Ecuador, Peru, seasonally from Panama. That kind of mismanaged waste from urban areas enters rivers, flows out into the ocean, and then takes, between 6 months to 3 years to reach the Galapagos Islands. So you've got that is one input that we know of. But actually, the much larger input that we predict is that more than 40% of that incoming waste is from maritime sources. So not from the continent, but somewhere in between the continent and the Galapagos Islands. There are huge quantities of industrial fishing fleets, Ecuadorian, Peruvian fishing fleets as well. And actually, we think that a lot of the waste is coming from that kind of fishing activity in the area. And often that is domestic waste, like sacks of domestic products that are being used on the ships and then discarded or mismanaged and ending up in the ocean. 69% of what we find in Galapagos in terms of plastic is single use. And a lot of that is drinks bottles. And a lot of those drinks bottles are water bottles. And obviously that's quite a clear link if you think about the sustenance that a crew of fishers need on board a boat. They need water to last a long time. And at the moment, that's the system that they have. They don't have an alternative system. But the problem is the waste management. It's not being removed or taken away with those boats. It's being discarded into the ocean. And that ends up in Galapagos.
Yes, and what effect is that having specifically on sea lions?
Yeah, so with the sea lions, so we published a report that we developed with the Galapagos National Park, and that was kind of investigating the sources and impacts of plastic pollution in Galapagos specifically. And in that report, we highlighted that sea lions are one of 27 species at really high risk of plastic pollution. So that's through observations of sea lions becoming like entangled with plastics and interacting with them a lot. So that's entangled with stuff like fishing lines, stuff like plastic bags, and then interacting with things like bottles. We've got lots of records of that, and also interacting with fish aggregating devices. So this is kind of a new-ish area for us, is looking at these fish aggregating devices or FADs. And they are used by fisheries in the region they kind of float on the water and they attract smaller fish, which attract larger fish, which ultimately attract tuna quite far beneath them. And then these float through the ocean, collecting biomass, and then fishing boats will come and scoop up the really valuable fish. But the problem is, obviously, they're just floating, they're drifting on currents, they're not propelled by anything, they just go where the currents take them. So they do enter the Galapagos Marine Reserve and then wash up on beaches. And these FADs have humongous trailing nets, often plastic nets as well, that then get stranded on coastlines. I was talking before about that Galapagos is made of this really crunchy, scratchy, sharp rocks. If you think of like a big mass of plastic netting washing up on a coastline like that. It's going to get caught, it's going to get fragmented, you're going to get local species interacting with it. So yeah, those are the things that we're really worried about with sea lions specifically and plastic pollution and fads.
Okay, and sort of to pick apart your work more specifically, so what are some of those conservation challenges that you face conducting your work?
Yeah, so in Galapagos as a whole, there are quite a few conservation threats. So, like all island systems, invasive species are huge. So that's on the land and in the ocean as well. So, despite really good and strong biosecurity measures, there are like things like feral rats and cats. We also have a lot of problems with like invasive plants as well, stuff like blackberry that is just getting in and then it spreads everywhere. It's really hard to manage, really hard to control, and has negative impacts on species like the giant tortoise as well. So we're supporting projects that are eradicating invasive species and also monitoring them. So especially with the marine invasive species, they're a lot harder to see. You're not like confronted by them every day. They're all under the water. So yeah, we're helping support projects that are conducting like baseline and monitoring around the archipelago for what's already there, and then having an early detection system for new species that could be coming in. Also, again, kind of like everywhere else, climate change is huge. So I think I mentioned earlier about the El Nino events, the ENSO events. So this is a big climate pattern that has a really, really strong impact on Galapagos. So basically, the way that the currents work around Galapagos is that you have winds pushing from east to west, and that corresponds to currents moving from east to west. So you have warm water being taken away towards the west, and then you get this really high nutrient-rich cold water upwelling from the deep sea along the western coast of Galapagos. And that's one of the reasons why we get so many cool endemic species and such high productivity in the marine ecosystem in Galapagos, is because you get this really like delicious nutrient-rich water from the deep sea. But then what happens during El Nino events is those winds lessen, which kind of causes that warm water that is otherwise moving away to kind of slosh back and surround the island. So you have this really warm water, which sounds great, but actually it's very nutrient poor and it causes a kind of collapse in the marine ecosystems and the food chains. So that also impacts like sea lions, marine iguanas, their whole food availability is completely thrown out of whack. It's really hard for them to, you know, deal with those stresses, especially when you combine them with other threats like plastic pollution. If you have a population of animals that are already under stress from these kind of climate events, and then you're adding in something like plastic pollution that's entangling them, their resilience just goes down. It's so hard for them to, you know, maintain healthy populations. So yeah, climate change is something that we're worried about increasing the frequency and intensity of those El Nino events. So we're supporting lots of work to again gather baselines and look out for impacts on these big climatic events. So, for example, one of the projects we work with is called Iguanas from Above, and they're doing this groundbreaking research with drones, basically mapping all of the marine iguana populations throughout the whole archipelago, which is something that hasn't been done before. There are lots of different subspecies of marine iguanas, but there's not that much data on kind of where they are and what the population sizes are like. So we're building up this baseline so we can see how those species are being impacted by future shocks like climate change and like plastic pollution.
Just to quickly cycle back to something. You mentioned marine invasive species.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never actually thought of that as a concept. So tell me what sort of species, how do they get there? Are we talking more sort of like vegetation, or was it invasive fish? I don't know if that's even that's something
Yeah.
I've thought about. How does that come about?
Yeah, so it's both. So you do get invasive algae. So this is actually one of
Oh,
the big threats to marine iguana populations is there's this invasive algae that can come in and change the food source of marine iguanas. So normally they eat one algae. If that algae then got replaced by something that they don't want to eat, then you know when an El Nino year comes along and their natural food source goes down, if it then gets replaced by something that they can't digest as well, they're going to really, really struggle to to cope with that. So that's one invasive species is like an algae. You also get things like bryozoans that come in on ship hulls, which are little colonial organisms, and they basically like gum up fishing gear. So you have anything kind of in the port just gets completely kind of overtaken by these bryozoans, and just causing like a big problem for the local community and their equipment that's in the water, and obviously changing the kind of ecological structure of those systems as well. And then also fish are a huge concern, invasive wise, like lionfish. They're not in Galapagos yet, touch wood, they won't ever be. But something like that that hunts, coral reef fish, really, really prolifically, and they're found in a lot of places. So that's the kind of thing where, you know, something like that could potentially be introduced one day. And you can look at Hawaii as a really good example of an island that's really, really struggling with marine invasive species. So yeah, that's actively what we're trying to prevent happening to Galapagos, because at the moment the marine ecosystem is so incredibly diverse and incredible that we need to stop marine invasives getting in. But yeah, thank you for highlighting that, because it's
No,
not
that's fascinating. That never occurred to me. Okay, so in terms of the plastic itself, so some of the work you're doing, of course, lots of monitoring, seeing how these species are getting on. But is the eventual aim, is it to remove the plastic? And I spent, I lived in Ecuador for a while, Peru. I fully appreciate how remote and difficult it is to transport and sort of import and export things from the Galapagos. So how is that going to work? Is it a case of just get your litter picker, bin bag on the beach, throw it in the back of a boat, or what's the general logistics of removing the plastic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're trying to decrease the risk to species, because that is our focus as a conservation charity, is decreasing the risk of species. So we're trying to do it in a few different ways. So one of them is mitigation. So it is that cleanup element of the immediate threat is that there is plastic on those beaches that species are interacting with. It's affecting ecosystems and species in ways that we understand and also ways that we don't understand. So we just need to get that plastic off. So we're doing that by working with the local community. So we have the amazing Galapagos National Park and another partner of ours called Conservation International that run these coastal cleanup trips around the archipelago. And these trips are incredible. They are focusing on removing plastic from beaches. So we are working with them at the moment to increase their capacity to do that and increase the effectiveness of those coastal cleanup trips, so that they're removing the maximum amount of plastic they can, gathering as much data as they can about what we're finding to link back to where it's coming from, because that's the second part of it is preventing future plastic pollution, right? So we need to be working at that kind of higher level to stop plastic entering the oceans, to find viable alternatives. And we're kind of doing this in a couple of ways. So we have a science to solutions approach. So one of our networks that we have at GCT is called the Pacific Plastic Science to Solutions Network. And it's this incredible network of researchers, NGOs, other organizations, and just like change-making individuals from across the world, all trying to reduce plastic pollution in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, including Galapagos. And this network of people are researching where the plastic's coming from, what kind of plastic it is, and what the impacts of that plastic are, and then trying to identify like potential intervention points that then we can test solutions in. So if we're saying a really problem like item that we find a lot are plastic bottles, so then we can say, okay, that's clearly an issue. What solutions are there to preventing single-use plastic bottles? Is it refill stations? Is it returnable schemes? Is it policy? Like what do those interventions look like? And yeah, we're just building up this huge wealth of evidence in the region and in Galapagos on the current kind of state of things. So getting a really good baseline for what plastics are arriving now, so that we can then look at how successful future interventions are. We also have a grassroots to governments approach. So we work a lot with the local community to advocate against this unfair burden that island communities have, especially of this incoming waste. Like I said, more than 95% of plastic that you find on coastlines in Galapagos is from elsewhere. This isn't a problem within the local community. It's such an external issue in places like Galapagos. So yeah, we're working with the local community, local NGOs. We're also working with the local municipalities. So we've restarted the Plastics Commission with them to help try and find solutions on island that are like contextualized for the Galapagos community and make sense. And we're trying to find solutions and alternatives as well on the ground. And then excitingly, we're also involved in these really high-end, high-level discussions around the Global Plastics Treaty as well. So we've had a lot of impact over the last couple of years, like raising the issue of plastics in Galapagos up to this global level. And we've been doing that through the network that I mentioned earlier, and then another network joining different islands around the Pacific to kind of raise community voices about this unfair burden and hopefully impact, local policies, national policies, and global policies and enforcement to prevent the single-use plastic leaking into the environment and ultimately places like Galapagos, where it has devastating impacts.
Of course. And I imagine so another issue that you are involved with is overfishing. And so again, as you mentioned, Galapagos very isolated, and you said there's quite a surprisingly large population of people living there. And I'm quite interested to know a little bit more about the kind of the interplay between, there's an isolated group of people who are obviously quite reliant on fish, and then how do you sort of navigate, excuse me, illegal fishing, overfishing, but at the same time helping, making sure that these communities can eat. But then again, sort of taking into consideration the conservation overfishing issue as well. So what's the sort of interplay there?
Yeah, it is a conflicting area to work in for sure. So within the Galapagos Marine Reserve itself, and with the local fishers that you have in Galapagos, it's all artisanal. They're very small boats doing a relatively quite small amount of fishing for the local community, and it is really well managed. So they have certain areas that they can't fish. They have certain areas that are no take zones. They've got no long lining zones. And they've got seasonal closures of some fisheries as well. So that kind of artisanal view on fishing is actually quite well managed. I'm not a fisheries expert, so I don't have all the stats on that.
Oh, of course.
But it is, yeah, very well managed. But the issues that I see are with the unregulated illegal fishing and also like the legal grey areas that you get and like the weird loopholes that you get. So around the Galapagos Marine Reserve, if you look on Global Fishing Watch, the website, it shows you like fishing traffic, like where all the boats are. And you can go on there, and I haven't been on there for a while, but the last time I went on, you can see like these really high intensity areas of fishing, like on the border of the marine reserve and then on the border of the economic exclusion zone. So in between Ecuador and Galapagos, you've got the economic exclusion zone around Ecuador that kind of extends out into the sea. Then you've got it extending out from Galapagos. And then in the middle, there's this little kind of sandwich filling of high seas, like international waters, where, kind of anything goes. So that's where you get the high areas of international fishing fleets that can just kind of, freely move around that area. And that's one of the issues with it as well, is that those currents, I was saying earlier about the winds that move from east to west. So you get these currents moving from east to west, and that extends to the continent as well. So you have the Panama current coming down from the north and then across, and then you have the Humboldt current coming up from the south and across in the same way. And those currents that kind of swirl past the mainland and then out towards Galapagos, any fishing activity that's happening just off the continent, the currents move straight through it and then straight through the Galapagos Marine Reserve, straight through the island. So any plastic pollution that's discarded at sea, any fishing gear that's lost accidentally, or in the case of fads, purposefully placed in the water to be lost and then recovered later on, is going to move through the marine reserve, which is, not ideal, to say the least.
Of course, of course. Okay, so speaking about the future, so of course, got a lot of busy work going on, and I was curious to know within the next 5, 10 years or whatever sort of time span you feel that you could comment on or predict? Of course, everything's always excuse me, I can't speak. Everything's always a little bit up in the air at the moment. And yeah, where would you like to see things go? How could things grow, develop, improve? So what would be like a best case scenario, and what would be some of the challenges towards getting there?
Yeah, great question. So there are obviously a few different scenarios that could happen. So if nothing changes with what we're currently doing, the situation, frankly, is bleak. If we don't do anything to interrupt the amount of plastic reaching the oceans, and if we don't prioritize cleaning up the plastic that is arriving in Galapagos, the situation is terrible. There's going to be so much plastic pollution on those coastlines that won't be being removed, species interacting with it causing problems that we can't even understand at the moment. And that's just not an option. That first scenario of doing nothing is just absolutely not an option. Then the second scenario is carrying on as we are. So we're trying to support cleanup. There aren't huge funds available for cleanup. And I think this is kind of a symptom of a few years ago, there was a really big push to not focus on cleanup and look further upstream to that policy level, which I completely agree with. We definitely need to be working to turn off the tap of plastic pollution entering the oceans, but you cannot ignore the importance of also, alongside doing those things, removing the plastic from the beaches. If you're not removing it, the problem, that's where the impact is. That's where we need to be really like prioritizing funds. And I think that shift to upstream saw a kind of a shift in the funding arena to not prioritize that cleanup. So yeah, if we carry along as we are with that not being prioritized, again, that's going to be really bad for coastal communities, island communities, and this incoming waste. At the moment, the you know there's not a sustainable way of financing cleanup at the moment. It's supported by NGOs and organizations like the National Park in Galapagos. They're diverting a lot of staff time and a lot of their funds and NGO funds to these cleanups. And where that money could be being spent on other things, other issues that are impacting the islands, but instead it's being spent on just cleaning up this never-ending amount of rubbish that's arriving. So there needs to be sustainable financing, maybe through something like polluter pays. So the companies that are responsible for creating the plastics, manufacturing them, selling them, distributing them, they need to have more accountability in the sustainable financing of cleaning up that plastic from these remote and really precious sites. So that's an area where I would really hope to see some improvement, especially in the Global Plastics Treaty. I think that's something that we want to push for. We'd encourage other people to push for. Yeah. And then, yeah, the third scenario, if everything goes exactly to plan, there's loads, there's loads you could do. And the picture could be really positive. We see it as like, it's a system change. And in somewhere like Galapagos, it would provide an amazing case study to the rest of the world. If we could work alongside the local community to support them to create a circular economic system that is like tailor-made for the islands, that takes into account alternative livelihoods that people could have in Galapagos that are part of this inclusive circular economy system. We could be running trial solutions and really quickly seeing if it works, if it doesn't, and then changing it. So yeah, I see a big role for the community and like innovating to come up with new ideas, and also not even new ideas to reduce plastic pollution and plastic use, but ideas that exist already, alternatives that exist already, and just making them available to communities like that. Because at the moment, you do have things like bioplastics, but are they available to local communities? Is that something that is like feasible? Do we know that yet? We need to do more work on that. Yeah, and then also, so we're working with the Galapagos National Park on this management plan for plastics that will be published later on this year, and that is looking to increase the effectiveness of the coastal cleanup and provide really practical implementation for that, and also build capacity within the park team. So increasing their technological and science capacity, because this is issues that the islands have had for a long time, is like very, very bad internet connection. Now it's a lot better, the situation now. But there are still some kind of remaining challenges in that internet and data storage and data processing side of things. So that's something where I see so much opportunity, is working with the community to increase their capacity to, do this science and do that interrogation of the data themselves. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting thing. And then yeah, that the global landscape around the plastics treaty and what comes out of that. So there's a chance that it could be signed in Galapagos, and then it would be called the Galapagos Treaty on Plastic Pollution, which would be an incredible outcome. And I think if that does happen, it would be incredibly exciting for us to be one of the main actors working on plastics in Galapagos. And I think the opportunity to use Galapagos as this model for how to do it right. It's a closed system. It's an island. Like you say, all of the plastic is being imported. No plastics are being made in Galapagos. They're all coming from external sources. So if you could get a circular system that just really works for the community, and alongside that have the plastic that is arriving not through imported, that's just washing in, if you can have a system to get that off the islands, to clean it up and get it away, like those two things combined, that as a model for other islands, other coastal communities, I think would be so powerful and a great kind of message of hope for the world as well.
Fantastic. Amazing. Okay, finally, Jess, where can people find you to support your work, get involved, or donate, or just find out more?
Yeah, amazing. So we've got our Galapagos Conservation Trust website that I believe will be linked in the show notes for this episode. And we've also got coming up, we've got the Big Give Green Match Fund appeal. So this is a week-long fundraising activity that we're doing to protect the Galapagos sea lion, especially in regards to plastic pollution. So that is from the 22nd of April up until midday on the 29th of April. And we'll have a campaign running where everything that's donated during that week will be doubled, which is an incredible opportunity to donate. If you're going to do it, genuinely every little helps, and your little is actually doubled, so it's even better. And we have a target of £20,000 for that campaign, and that money will go directly to protecting sea lions and other species and other ecosystems that are impacted by plastic pollution and fish aggregating devices. So it will go mostly towards cleanup and also supporting our education work on islands as well. So that's a great way to do your bit and help out and get involved. And also, I think we'll also link in the episode notes the Plastic Pollution Free Galapagos 5 Years of Science to Solutions report. So you can read in a bit more detail some of the statistics that I've mentioned, and you can see some of the data that we've collected over the last 5 years on this project. So that would be great.
Fantastic. Jess, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jack.